Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is NEWSFIST. We talk about liberalism and Schmitt and why liberals have a hard time grokking the friend-enemy distinction and make a lot of enemies and lose a lot of friends in the process. He's a great guy. You can find him all over the internet. I'll link down to his work in the description where you can find links to support this channel. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Here is NEWSFIST. Hello.
How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right, mate. I gotta go back to London in a few days, so I'm not too keen on that, man.
Why not? London's a worldly city. Maybe even a third worldly city.
Third worldly city, exactly, mate. Honestly, there's just living there's a bit like lockdown now because everything's insanely expensive and there's just like nothing to do that I can afford anymore. So in practice, I just wind up staying at home and just working. And then, after I think about 3 months is about my limit before I have to like tap out and go somewhere else,
Really? You grew up there?
No, I grew up in Sydney, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Hence my Australian accent.
Yeah, and aesthetic.
Yeah. You're looking comfy. I like the dressing gown and the 5-day growth. Very nice.
This is more like 2 weeks, but I do need to clean it up. Yeah. I figured you guys are doing slop tubes, so I'm going to regress back to my casual wear.
Yeah. No, totally, man. We're not fancy.
No.
So I thought we could talk about woke centrism, do a little bit on Schmitt maybe, because I'm just very, very annoyed about how they keep misrepresenting Schmitt. Oh, you've been watching the streams, I guess you know I've got a background in international relations and political theory, so it just annoys the shit out of me that they're just completely misrepresenting like what is a pretty good thinker,
Mm-hmm. Why would they do such a thing?
They are fundamentally liberals, and this is the essential problem with liberalism: is that it is a totalizing ideology. It is an idea that everyone can be fit into this sort of one system, regardless of where they're from. It's blank slateism and stuff, and the inevitable endpoint when this is revealed not to be true is it's basically like a kind of crisis that comes about. You know what I mean? Like Schmitt talks about this a lot, right? That basically the idea behind liberalism is to take the friend-enemy distinction out of politics, right? To like make it so that everyone can like exist together, and to an extent this is a noble goal, but the problem becomes then that because the friend-enemy distinction never really goes away, you wind up with this weird paradox that because humans always wind up needing an enemy of some kind, right? Like particularly when it comes to like war, the only real way to define an enemy in the liberal context is being anti-liberal, right? So we're actually seeing this in the war against war against Russia at the moment, or all the other sort of like liberal wars like Iraq, right? The way these wars are sold to the liberal population is never we have a territorial or economic interest in fighting this other nation, right? It is always we have to fight them because they are anti-liberal. And liberalism must expand across the entire globe, right? We must go into Afghanistan and get the goat herders to, believe in women's rights and voting and all this kind of like stuff. It's ridiculous on the face of it, right? If the friend-enemy distinction would be actually much, much easier to manage, right? Because then you could just say, okay, those people aren't like us. And then if you need to sell a war against them, you can say, well, we need to go to war.
Threat.
Yeah, well, or, we need to secure this passage for trade, but they don't ever want to, if you believe sort of the liberal ideal, right? No war sort of since World War II, or possibly earlier, has ever been fought for any kind of material or territorial gain, because liberals don't do that, right? We fight for higher ideals, right? But they don't, right? They just,
well, I mean, by fight, I think liberals will be okay with economic warfare. If you take the friend-enemy distinction and you construe it as competitors, or as, if you can fit it into trade relations, then it seems more palpable to them. But when they think in terms of friend-enemy, they're allergic to that. I think what you're making me think of is the liberal ideology is that Coca-Cola commercial. I'd like to teach the world to vote in perfect democracy. Boom, boom, boom. Everybody's standing there, with their democracies, and there's slight variations, like an airport, and the variation comes down to food, right? The liberal project is to turn everything into an airport where you can go to your falafel stand or to your fried chicken stand, and which kind of breaks down because you kind of, when you bring up fried chicken, you think certain groups are going to go to certain stands, and then they're going to have different emergent behaviors on a group level, and those group levels can spill into inimical existential threat to other groups, because certain ways of life don't bandy about well together, and so you have this liberal system eventually. And I don't think that modern day liberals will be kind even thinking of themselves as having a system. They'll say, we're going to put all this stuff into effect, but the bureaucracy that comes into effect downstream from their ideals, they kind of wash their hands of. Like, well, that's not what we really want. We want libertarianism. But they assume that there will be this grand leveling marketplace, or this invisible hand, this laissez-faire, the spirit of the age, to go back to Yarvin's How Dawkins Got Pwned, that they don't see themselves, and that they can't take
they do not believe. They don't believe in the marketplace of ideas, and they don't believe in the invisible hand, right? Their thumb is always on the scale, right? They are always like, oh yes, the marketplace of ideas, except for this idea and that idea, right? I mean, this goes back to Karl Popper, like, fundamentally, right? A liberal.
Could you get into that? Because Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance, some people use that, liberals use that as a defense of, we're going to attack the illiberal idea. But I think Popper was actually being sarcastic or pointing to a problem with the liberal system.
I don't know. I mean, I read Popper. It's been a while, right? But the sort of back of the matchbook version, right, that keeps getting circulated around on Reddit, right, which is basically, Karl Popper says it's okay to punch Nazis. Is definitely not. I mean, it's 2 volumes, right? It's 2 quite dense volumes, right? And oh my God, it's been a while. It really, really has been a while. And now all I can really remember is the meme, because we
don't have to get into it, because Schmidt is also becoming a meme, the anti-Popper meme. The friend-enemy distinction is being distilled into, if you think that way, you're thinking tribally, and liberals don't like tribalism. That's a trigger word for them. It's like, well, you're a tribe.
They love
you're a tribe.
No, I mean, this is the thing.
We don't believe in tribalism.
My tribe doesn't believe in tribalism. Like the woke centrists, for example, right? They're all like, oh my God, the friend-enemy distinction. They do it more than anybody else, right? They are so rigid in their outlook. They're like, we can't. I think you bringing up Popper is highly germane, really, right? It's this idea that we can't countenance any one extreme, and of course, who gets to define extremism? Well, they do.
Yeah,
obviously, right?
The horseshoe theory. It's like, look, I'm in the middle, and I'm right, and you guys are extremes.
This is the thing about political words, generally speaking, right? Is that
what do you mean?
It's very much in the definition and who gets to make the definition, right? And so they are basically, and the other thing that annoys me is they don't really believe in democracy, right? Because if they did really believe in democracy, then they would say, well, if everyone wants to vote for an illiberal outcome, then that's democracy. But democracy has a long and storied history of this. I'm always reminded of when the French did elections in Algeria. I forget exactly when. I think it was like 1950s or something like that, right? And all the Algerians basically voted to like leave democracy and institute Islam. And so the French just said, oh, well, you know, that election doesn't count. We're still doing democracy, right? So
the French are still doing that with their elections,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, the EU does that all the time, right? Like, so democracy becomes effectively a farce, right? It becomes a way of just externalizing blame for the policies of the political elite onto the people. And as Aidan Paladin pointed out in this great video, democracy actually induces mental illness among the electorate because it persuades them that they have control over these vast processes of which they have no control, number one, right? And number two, that their vote matters, right? And you see that people, they go insane. They're like, oh, how can you vote for this person? How can you vote for that person? Schmidt talks about this as well, by the way. The idea that because of the way democracy works, the only way to ensure that you stay in power is to control the minds of the people. Yeah. Therefore, what would be a relatively limited arena of matters of state, say under a monarchy, begin to bleed out into the rest of society, right? The political class must take over the media. They must take over religion. They must
Your dining room table has to be political now.
Yeah, yeah. And then conversely, society begins to bleed into the political as well. So you wind up with this situation where instead of under a monarchy where, you know, you just be like, oh, you know, I'm going to farm my dirt or, you know, run my shop. You know, I don't have any control over, for example, who the king declares war against. Everybody starts going insane, believing that they have input into this decision. And then they also feel like they have to take responsibility as well for the outcome of these decisions when they have no actual control. And another thing that you find is that democracy has given people the illusion that everyone can do politics, that everyone understands politics. There is no other complex art form in which this would be allowed or even countenanced, right? No one would go around saying, oh, yes, the man on the Clapham omnibus, he understands, complicated maths, right? Like he can solve Gödel's theorem, right? Everyone would be like, no, you've got to go to university for 12 years and write it, before we even go, or maybe you're like some autistic savant. Politics is exactly the same. It is an art to which some people are more suited, some are less, and you need serious education and reading to understand it. But because of democracy, it's this idea that anyone can do it, and they can't. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why we have so many retarded political movements. Communism would be, sort of the example par excellence, where everybody, because that's the communist ideal, right? Everybody gets to vote on everything, right? So, your dear leader, I don't know, he wants to take a crap, and everyone's got to vote on, it completely breaks apart. When the Bolsheviks took over in Russia, the Russian army was in a right state, and for a while everyone was going around saying, "Oh, we're gonna have a new kind of army now, where every single decision is made democratically." How long did that last? It didn't last very long at all, because you can't run an army like that. You need a hierarchy. You need, dare I say it, collectivism. I know, collectivism. That pain of the individualist. How dare you suggest that we are all individuals after all?
That's a really good point, because the classical liberals, Jordan Peterson, etc., will say that you can't get away from hierarchy. It's embedded in every structure in existence, including human social structures. But you just tied collectivism to hierarchy.
Yes.
And that is where they draw the line. Somehow there's just these naturally self-organizing systems into hierarchy, but the very nature of having allegiance, having loyalty, is that I'm ceding my executive function in a certain domain to a higher up. Therefore, I become a part of the collective within that structure, within that pyramid.
Yes. And not only that, and I was having a massive back and forth with the centrist woke centrists over this. To bind a group together, whether in a nation or an army or civil service or any organization, you need some kind of higher ideal, right? This is the idea
civic
of
religion is what they'll go for. That's what they'll say, and then they'll say, well, not nationalism, patriotism, and they'll start mincing words because they don't really want that, but they know they need it. Yeah.
It's like the way they act towards Christianity, right? Christianity is fine, for the plebs. Freaking Lindsay's first or second book was all about this, right? Why everyone's wrong about God, right? We need to discover why these poor, wretched people feel like they need religions. Like, what psychological need is it fulfilling? Perhaps we could have therapists that would help them detransition away from religion. It's highly parochial, and I get the feeling that the libs do exactly the same thing with nationalism. They're like, now Plato, of course, would say that this kind, he called the big lie, right? Which I think is it's a bit much, but he's kind of making a point, right? That any national identity or any national story is an absolute necessary part of a nation, right? And because this story has to be relatively simple, it has to be understood by the stupidest among you, and it has to bind people together and push them in a certain direction. It cannot be 100% true, okay? Because maybe your nation is like 300 years old, and if you really want to appreciate the nuances of the history of that nation, you would have to read 20 years worth of stuff, okay? You need something that the man on the Clapham omnibus can get behind, right? We're gonna bash the Bosch, right? We're gonna hammer the Hun, right? And all of these stories, they need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They need to have a teleology. And the woke centrists hate this. They're like, they believe that it seems that all of the evils of the world flow from this. Whereas I would make the opposing argument that actually most of the good in the world flows from this, because unless you can bond people into some kind of cohesive unit or collective, you're never going to get anything done. For the woke centrists, there's basically like a two-pole dialectic here. Either there is mass individualism, right? There's I don't take orders from no one. I'm going to drink my Coca-Cola, and I'm going to vote at the voting booth, and no. Voting is a collective activity as well, whatever. Or there is complete Chinese totalitarian abnegation of the self, like the thing you get under Mao. There is an in-between, right? There is in-between these two poles, right? A man can be a shopkeeper and also feel like he belongs to a nation and to a people. He doesn't have to be like, I belong to this nation, and therefore the commissar's going to lean over me and, make me do 6 hours of self-criticism a day and lock me in a a dormitory with everybody else. It's weird.
What I think that they get defensive over, and when we are saying we're talking about a certain set of online commentator that is against the friend-enemy distinction, is for liberty, has kind of an attitude of the 1990s were peak end of history, and that 9/11 was an aberration or something like that, and the COVID tyranny was an aberration from that. And so there is a they there. We're not just making an enemy. We're defining a very specific set of people with specific sets of values that seem to have a difficult time with what you said. Either it's pure liberty, pure marketplace of ideas, marketplace of individuality and individual expression, and sexual amorality, as long as it stays in the bedroom, whatever that means, right? All these things have to stay in the bedroom. You can be tribal, just keep it in the bedroom, keep it in the bed. And I think that they're very defensive about a very specific, culturally time-bound, historically bound set of mores of a specific people that you could probably say is the Anglosphere. Maybe some parts of continental Europe, definitely not Russia, but it was a very specific, it's America, it is Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. There's this sense of individualism, of liberty, of self-agency, of maximizing agency that was afforded to these specific cultures and during specific times in history that are kind of passing right now, based on, my contention is based on basically Christian values in the Protestant vein, in the Enlightenment vein. Like that is, so we can have that. We can have that. And if we want to keep it, we have to understand that it's not universal, that it's very contingent on religious teachings, on fundamental values that speak to that control and speak to the animal, the intuition, and everything that's not the rational mind that makes the market decisions or makes all these different decisions, that consents to all these different stratagems and axioms of liberalism.
But also racial and cultural homogeneity. I mean, look, let us consider.
That's another trigger thing. I mean, there's gay race communism, which is enforced totalitarian equity, and then there's gay race liberalism, which is bureaucratically enforced equality. It's a different strain. They want all the pride flags that they want. They want racial. They call it equality of opportunity, but that still requires them to futz around with opportunities so that they get their hand in the pie. But it's through this thing they call education that they do not call indoctrination. They specifically say, we do not indoctrinate, we educate. But so they're always sneaking in their indoctrination, their manipulation, and their weighing of the scales on discourse, on behavior through all of this fancy rhetoric in these bureaucratic systems that distributes authority, that distributes actual agency across a broad spectrum. And they really dislike authority. I really do think that there's an embedded daddy issue within the liberal mindset. They want to be a baby on a playground, that things just kind of appear. You work hard, you get a really good sandcastle, you get your picket fence, right? And all the different things that keep that playground safe, they don't have answers to.
They like authority as long as that authority benefits them. Right? This is a constant theme. Right? Everyone's like, oh, I don't like authority. Well, okay.
But what is authority? Declaring what a word means, that's authority. And you see them do that all the time. So go on, I'm sorry.
What is authority and what is liberty? Okay. I think the easiest way to define liberty is when all the stuff that you would want to do, if we take like a Venn diagram, right? So on one side, all the stuff that you'd want to do, and then the laws against stuff, and there's like a 95% overlap, right? And it only excludes people who go against the sort of fundamental cultural, religious, and racial mores of that society. Okay, so say you want to go to the park, kidnap and eat the swans. Now, under a truly liberal, a free society, liberty, you wouldn't need really a law against that because it just wouldn't occur to 99.99% of people to do that. And the 0.0001% of people whom it would occur to do that, you declare them insane and you lock them up in an asylum, right? And so that's fine. As soon as this cultural, religious, racial hegemony, homogeneity, I guess you could call it, the lefties would call it hegemony, right? Breaks up.
Yeah.
You suddenly have multiple poles or, many poles, and then you need more and more laws to cover things that most people would not even consider doing, right? The English are famous for this, right? Oh, I wouldn't do that. It's just not English. There's a very, very powerful restraining and motivating force. And as long as this is in play, policing can be very light. The laws can be very, very light. The number of things you've got to outlaw are very, very few, like quite frankly, because you've just got to outlaw the things that, especially extremes of the passions, for example. Like
Yes,
you find
the toaster fucker conundrum. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You kill your wife's lover or something like that, right? But then as soon as you import 1 million Bamalians, you need all these other laws. Oh, don't abduct schoolgirls off the street.
Don't murder.
Don't eat swans. And again, I'm not saying that the white English, for example, have never committed rape or murder or any of these kinds of other things, right? What I'm saying is that the number of people that do this are low enough that you can maintain order with a relatively small police force. As the number of people that would do this thing begin to increase, the larger and larger your police force becomes, and then the more and more tyranny just starts creeping in, right? Liberty is not, as I was saying, liberty is not a set of rules. Liberty is when your natural inclination and the legal system are basically the same. And so you just, 90% of the stuff that you would want to do is totally fine. And, and the 10%, maybe, most of that, you're like, I wouldn't want to do that. That would be, against the law. So you got a bit of deterrence in there.
Yeah.
That's liberty, in my opinion.
You made a connection in my head. So there's this video going around of these two female police officers. One's this really hot, cutie, blonde British, and then there's this hijab wearing. I'm sure she's British, but she's of another ethnicity. They come and they enter into a house seeking to look at a kid's computer. And apparently there's this and that back and forth about it. But it becomes a meme because we know that the British are policing what it is to be British on one level, and then they are not policing what it is to be, let's say, Pakistani on another level. And the Pakistanis are committing mass rape, and the British are looking at or posting spicy memes. And so the power structure, for some reason, is actually more concerned with policing the English to maintain their Englishness, which is on the level of communication and propriety, where on the other side, it's completely failing to police this alien force that has completely different mores on a violent level. And so it's interesting that English system is producing this disparity, this two-tiered police system, because it is trying to maintain what it is to be English and also having a hard time, I guess in a way it's trying to maintain what it is to be not Pakistani per se, but the behaviors that are being promulgated by the Pakistanis in Britain are part of their culture. And so there's a cultural sympathy, but the system's English itself. So it wants to low expectation bigotry these guys, and then high expectation bigotry the other guys.
It is the soft bigotry of low expectations, number one, and it is social constructivism as well. Okay, so the one thing that the West cannot admit, right, like under pain of death, is that there is any genetic or innate component to how people act, particularly in large groups. In my opinion, this is a observation so goddamn obvious that anyone who denies this just, I don't know, they're always saying, oh, Chud, you should travel more. Well, I have. And I've come to the conclusion that the reason why countries are different is because en masse, people have very different ways of acting. But because the West is fundamentally at its root social constructivist and blank slate, they really seem to believe that all they need to do is just explain stuff enough, and these widely disparate populations will suddenly realize the joys of English liberalism. It is such a retarded idea on its face, and this is what I was talking about earlier about liberalism being a totalizing ideology. It is a totalizing ideology. It is the idea that everybody in the world would prefer liberal democracy if only it could be explained to them. And any populations that don't, we will force them to be liberal democracy at the point of a gun, which isn't very liberal, actually, right? And Schmidt talks about this because he says that these the kind of wars that you get under these liberal totalizing ideologies are actually much, much worse than the kinds of wars that you used to get in Europe, because it dehumanizes the other side, right? They're not really human, they're illiberal. You can see this in the discourse around Russia at the moment, for example, right? No one frames the war against Russia as a war over spheres of influence and territory and stuff like that. It is always framed as like, we must destroy the Russians because they are anti-liberal. And this, of course, all ties back to World War II and why we had to fight the Nazis, because they were anti-liberal. It's just, so Schmitt's argument is that by erasing the friend-enemy distinction, you actually wind up with more fiercer and bloody wars, because every war essentially becomes a crusade, because you're no longer going to war to say, right, we want to just capture this bit of land, or we want to push you back to this border, or we want this economic advantage. Instead, it becomes a crusade to wipe out the illiberal, and it can't be done. And not only can it not be done, the people that they wind up fighting are frequently much, much more coherent in their ideas, in their desires, in their willingness to fight than the liberal is. Because what you're going to fight for liberalism, right? They don't define a boundary to anything. You're seeing the UK literally rip itself apart over this exact question, right? Yes. You can't define who is English and who isn't, because everybody is English. And so it just like a cell without a cell wall. The interior, it just bleeds away. There's no limiting principle, and it just goes insane.
I think part of, again, this is a great conversation. This is making me think. I've been obsessing about this stuff, so we're peas in a pod right now. Liberals have a hard time thinking in the group level, because they're so fundamentally individualist that they try to see the individual. And it doesn't matter how functional a society is, it's all just these individuals somehow arranging into this perfect functionality, or this very mutually beneficial functionality. It doesn't matter how dysfunctional a society is, it's all these individuals that are just somehow not understanding how to do these things. And the war, what you see after we fought the Nazis, what we did was, it wasn't just enough to bomb the hell out of Dresden, divide the country up, give half of it to arguably a worse set of people, and then maintain and occupy, which we did. We occupied West Germany, but we didn't just occupy them. We instigated a process of denazification. We caused them to hate themselves, to hate a certain blip in their history. And it wasn't just enough to occupy by force. It had to go inside. It had to be indoctrination. It had to be mind control. Because it is really about the thinking. And I think that that's an aspect of liberalism that is a descendant of Christianity on an evangelical level, on a propositional level. Believe in Jesus Christ and you will be saved. Believe in Western liberal democracy and you will be saved. You have to believe in it. It's the most important thing for you is to believe in it. And who defines that? I mean, that's the question. That's the really interesting question. As we enter into a new political arena with the assassination, God bless his soul, of Charlie Kirk, that has forced the right in America to draw a line, because we have an existential threat. The marketplace of ideas, even where that marketplace of ideas should be most openly implemented, the college campus, was shot in the throat, which is the very organ that makes liberalism possible. And Schmitt also he gets touchy about endless talking of parliamentary systems. It's just talking and talking and talking and talking.
Because this is what one of the sort of characteristics of the Weimar collapse was, that the entire government wound up paralyzed because of this endless talking. And one of the things that really annoys me again is these woke centrists, who it seems to me mainly studied philosophy. They never studied political science. So when
or history. There's very little history. Like Mao and Nazi Germany is the extent of their history. Every once in a while they'll bring up, I guess, Islam, but there's no rich historical backdrop to their story. There's a dearth of storytelling. Not
only that,
of heroes and villains.
They are absolutely. I got really frustrated talking to one of them the other day. Right? I was basically sort of trying to ask them for any sort of policy ideas, and they kept coming back and saying, the question is not the policy. The question is the ideas behind the policy. To which I was like, General, the barbarians are at the gate. They have set fire to the city. What are we to do, right? Oh, well, we must summon a parliament and carefully consider the ideas behind any course of action. Now, obviously, it's an extreme example I'm using to highlight a point. They hate this thing that they call decisionism, this idea that one person would make a decision that would, I don't know, upset somebody. I find myself very confused at how this actually works. Is it that once the decision is made, because it's a democracy, everyone feels like they are a part of this decision, and what if it goes wrong? And it seems as the crisis gets closer and closer, the more shrill they begin shrieking about the necessary decision that would need to be made to resolve that crisis. And things get worse and worse and worse. And they get more and more and more shrill. And everyone keeps saying, well, look, you need to make a decision. You need to do a thing, right? You need to round up these people and deport them. You need to actually use the power of the state in a direct manner. And they just can't get their head around it. But it seems they're all happy to use the power of the state, as you were saying, against thought crime. It's actually really interesting if you look at the difference between East and West Germany. So the communists just ruled by brute force, right? They didn't really care what you thought so much. I mean, if you wrote it down or you said anything, right? At least by the time of, I guess we're talking sort of, Stalin.
There was tons of policing of thought. I mean, the KGB was incredibly powerful in there. But go on. There's a nuance here. But they didn't try to reteach anybody, I guess.
Well, I guess there was some of that. But by the end of it, right? If we're talking sort of, I guess like the 50s. They just started using just brute force, right? Like secret police, all this kind of stuff, don't say anything. Whereas the West, they, as you said, they got right inside people's heads, right? The psychological warfare was far more insidious. Now, look, I know the communists do have a sort of a history of doing this kind of stuff. Lifton's Thought Control in Communist China, I think it's called. Really good book. But by the end of it, the communists were basically just ruling through brute force. Whereas in the West, because of this process that you described, the process of denazification, it sort of just took care of itself. You've killed the mind, and so the body must follow, if that makes sense. And you see this in the West. I think one of the big reasons why the West is in the state that it is because the whites just gave up the will to rule. So at some point, they basically decided that white people ruling anything, right, having a will to rule, right, a will to impose their values on anyone else is very, very bad because of colonialism or something, right? So you now have a situation like in the UK where the whites, as a rule, are generally just a sort of passive block in the middle, and all of politics basically evolves around these religious groups that do have a telos, right? That have a cause, that are pushing for a thing. And it's weird because they're still a majority of the country, but they just get ping-ponged back and forth. They are just essentially mostly very, very passive. I think this is changing now, but it is seen as this haram idea that the whites, generally speaking, would wish to impose their values even upon their own country. And of course, there's other groups who they just don't think like that. They're like, of course we're going to impose our values, right? That's what we do, right? Like Islam, of course, being the most potent example, because it's just baked in that the Ummah will reach across the entire world. And I think a lot of that is down to the nerfing of Christianity. Essentially, you see, Judeo-Christianity is basically what it is. It's this weird sort of hybrid of Judaism and Christianity, where Christianity just basically means like doing nothing really, right? Like just, you just sit passively and just let people do stuff to you.
Love your enemy. Yeah, you love your enemy.
Yeah. And like, there are multiple ways to interpret that. Obviously.
Turn the other cheek.
Yeah, there are multiple ways to interpret that as well. But the way it's interpreted in sort of, modern evangelical Christianity tends to be just don't fight back ever. And that's,
unless you're Israel.
Unless you're, well, again, right? Unless you're Israel, yeah. And it's a very, very weird situation where you essentially have a whole bunch of Christians essentially standing for another religion. Yeah.
I was talking to William Coulston, who's the head of the Social Democrat Party in England, and just recorded yesterday. It'll come out soon. Really interesting, nice guy. He's not a commie. He thinks that England is for the English, and the English should work together for England. So there's kind of a social-ish democratic will, but he really believes in strong borders, in faith, and in family. And I was talking to him about the basic parameters of this entire issue of politics. Friend and all these different political discussions that we're having, friend and enemy, and yada, yada, yada. It all revolves around capturing the imagination, the loyalty, and the energy of young men. And so I was asking him, who are the young men? Who are the next crop of leaders? And they're almost all either explicitly Christian or really open to Christianity. And I think that's the only path for a leader. And I think the only way for England to be corrected is for a strong leader, kind of in the vein of Trump, but I'm thinking more, Arthur, or, not Charlemagne. What's the guy? The guy who the Protestant guy that took over for a while? Cromwell. Yeah. But that guy is going to have to stand on a religious principle and a religious story. And that is the path forward. And the secularization of England following World War II, in my generation, Gen X, just kind of, it doesn't seem like any of us showed up to church in my country or in your country. My country is much more religious. I remember in the Bush era, Britain and Europe in general, Western Europe in general, was always looking down on America for being religious. But they have none of that, and so they have no antibodies for Islam. They have no antibodies for any other ideology than this kind of progressive tyranny of tolerance.
I mean, look, there's Christianity and there's Christianity, or there's Christianity and there's Judeo-Christianity. One of the reasons, for example, that the Orthodox Church is seeing a big resurgence is because it hasn't absorbed any of that stuff. And I think a lot of the reason why Gen Xers like us rejected Christianity so wholeheartedly is that the way it was explained, it just makes no sense, right? Like, so this idea, for example, this actually, so you must have heard the idea that God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient, right? That's not in the Bible. That's like an invention from, I think, the 1850s. These weird sort of, and so it follows. Every atheist knows this argument, right? If God is all of these things, why bad thing happen? That's not Christianity. I'm sorry, right? There's nothing, if God is all these things, right? Why Jesus died? Now, of course, the Orthodox, they don't have any of these problems because God is an unapproachable mystery, and you're just like, well, you are attempting to rationalize the most sort of ununderstandable mystery in the entire world. You don't have a hope. Just look, don't even try. Whereas, of course, the European Protestants and
the Catholics too. I mean, the difference, one of the main differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and they'll all say that they're Orthodox and Catholic, but I hope people know what I'm talking about, is their relationship to authority. One of the main differences is that Catholics have the Pope, and therefore the Catholics invented Protestantism, which is a rejection or at least a beef with daddy on the throne, right? Big daddy in the sky. And then atheism kind of follows from that, this more and more rationalist rejection of the transcendent and the collective toward the single authority, the rational process. And Orthodoxy doesn't have that problem. They have a deep sense of, I don't know what it would be. There's a word that's kind of respect and loyalty put together, but there's church fathers, there's the Bible, there's this constantly evolving, maybe they won't use that word because I think it's they think of it as timeless, this conversation within Orthodoxy, kind of similar to the Talmud and probably aspects of Islam, of these wise people, these wise basically men reinterpreting and unveiling further mysteries toward God. There's also this heretical from the Western mind, I think it's apotheosis or something. There's this way in which your journey as a Christian is to become more and more like God. But every cell is infused by the Spirit.
I have seen this massively misinterpreted. God, or to be like, it is an unapproachable ideal, right? There is no point at which you literally become God, right? It is an unapproachable ideal. I mean,
God is so far from us.
You could become a monk and live out the rest of your life on Mount Athos.
Yeah, but that doesn't even mean God wanted that for you. He didn't build you. He built very few people to be monk.
Well, that's my point, right? One of the things I actually really like about Orthodoxy is that it has a much more down-to-earth interpretation and acceptance of human nature than either Catholicism or Protestantism. If you look into some of the stories of the Orthodox saints, for example, a lot of them were really, really bad people before they converted. And it's a really, really interesting sort of strain that a lot of the Orthodox saints, they came to God after doing a bunch of really terrible stuff and realizing that was a bad way to go. It is usually sort of assumed by the layperson that it's never sort of stated this way, but it's sort of assumed that if you've done enough bad stuff, you could never come to understand Christ, or you're locked out. But that's not true. You don't have to be sort of a goody two shoes your entire life in order to convert, because if that was the case, it would be completely useless, right? What does redemption even mean if at a certain point you're like, oh, well, I've done a bunch of bad stuff. Well, I guess that's it. You know what I mean? Like, And
in Orthodoxy, in the literature that I've interacted with, it very central to that entire belief is an acceptance and a continual facing of one's own wretchedness and unworthiness and sinfulness constantly. That is the most important fact to get your head around, is that you are a wretched being. Which is, it's a definite weight, but then that allows for the release of that tension through complete and utter surrender to the one Almighty God.
Well, true, but also it's sort of an incremental thing. You know what I mean, right? You go to church, you fast, it's not some kind of weird bolt from the sky that you wake up one day and like the evangelicals, you like dance around and you're like, I'm healed. It's like this slow incremental thing. You get better and you get better, and unlike the Catholic or the Protestant conception, the idea is the remission of sin, right? So sin is like a cancer. It grows less and less and less. It's not quite so much based on this idea of forgiveness. The idea is that the closer you get to God, just the less you will sin. But again, you're never going to reach a point where you're never going to sin, right? Like it's just much more grounded in the way that humans actually are, as opposed to...
And it has a developmental arc rather than just an all of a sudden flip of the switch.
Yeah, it does.
But I speak with Jonathan Peugeot frequently. I'm very blessed by that friendship that we've sparked up over the years. And I was asking him, why hasn't Orthodoxy produced anything on the level of a Milton or a Dante or a Shakespeare? I mean, Shakespeare is arguably not Christian. I don't know. But he doesn't center Christianity that much, it seems like. But he said there's buildings, the Hagia Sophia, there's been buildings, but it does beg the question, if orthodoxy is closer to the truth, why have the Orthodox domains kind of been stifled politically and technologically, and why did the Catholic domains and then the Protestant domains just rule the world, just go incredibly hog wild in development in the material level?
Let's consider both Milton and Dante. They are both writing about essentially a sort of highly detailed story about how hell works and how paradise works. The Orthodox aren't about that because, again, it's an unapproachable mystery, right? Both Dante and Milton are essentially sort of outgrowths of this idea of, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. And you see tons of this through Europe, right? Like, we must dissect the unapproachable mystery, right? We must, the levels of hell and how do you get there and who goes what. None of that is in Orthodoxy. It's just, look, it's a mystery, right? You just gotta,
But also other aspects of Western Europe, the musical aspects, Mozart, Beethoven, and then the scientific aspects, and then the Enlightenment thinkers. Like, there is a certain amount of virtue and blessing that has been given to the West. And I think it is because of something inherent in the religious structure that is distinct from Orthodoxy. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like we're at the end of the growth of the Enlightenment, but we got the Enlightenment.
Well, the Orthodox Church was part of the Ottoman Empire after the conquering of Constantinople. So for centuries, they were basically just trying to hide under the boot of the Muslims. Yeah. So it's not like they really had the sort of cultural reach. Plus, the Orthodox Church is autochthonous. Is it autochthonous? It's got many heads, basically. There isn't one pope, right? So on the other hand, you don't get the same unity of message, but on the other hand, you can't just take over the papacy and then steer the entirety of Catholicism in some really weird direction, like we've seen since Vatican II. With the Catholics. It's much more distributed, I guess you would say. And I think that actually speaks much better to its longevity. Although, in terms of a hierarchy and being able to mobilize people, you could say that the Catholic structure was better. But then when the top gets subverted, the whole thing goes to crap. Look at what's happened to the Catholic Church. I mean, they're basically in the middle of a schism now, right? They don't really want to say it. But, you've got the trad Catholics and you've got the Vatican II Nostra Aetate.
The Prague Catholics,
Catholics,
Yeah. Well, how does that translate into our political domain? One of the answers that I get, that I wrench from the jaws of these dissident woke right baddies that I talk to, when we die at the end of the diagnosis of liberalism, of this and that isms, well, what's the answer? And it seems to be more localism, more regionalism, more distributism. I know that is probably a trigger word in some respects, but they do kind of want, they perceive that this centralized government is not working. And I don't know how that stops working in America to such a degree that we don't have that anymore, because America is so broad and vast. I don't know how even Britain survives what Britain's undergoing, but I do know that it needs to stand on its own feet and claim some sort of identity for itself that it's sacrificed on the pyre of the post-World War II consensus. But I'm wondering, how do we, if the answers in post-liberalism are not Chinese totalitarianism and are not free market libertinism or gay race liberalism, there's some sort of middle path, and it does have to do, I think, with an Anglican or an Anglo character, and I think it has something to do with the particular character of what it is to be an American or what it is to be an English person. And the woke centrists, screeches aside, what do you think is a vision of, the Republic, Platonic?
I think you need
construct.
You need a revivified Christianity, And the main reason why is because atheists, generally speaking, don't have strong convictions, unfortunately. Because when you essentially base everything upon science or ethics, I don't know if you've delved much into university, what passes for ethics, but modern ethics, you can talk your way around to like the most insane stuff, right? Because it all just relies upon reason and logic, and all of those things can be subverted. Faith is something that people can stand up to and just say no, right? Like, someone comes up to you and like, oh, I've got this scientific paper that, men can be women. No, right? Oh, how about we do a race comment? No, right? Like, how about we invite 1 million Bama? No, right? Just no. And without that very firm ability to just say, no, fuck off, it's not going to get any better. The Muslims have that, right? The Jews have that, right? You come up to them and say like, oh, look, science says you should eat pork. No. And it doesn't matter how you finesse it. It doesn't matter how many scientific papers, or they're just, no, it's against my faith. You can fuck off. The English and I think the Americans need more of that. Now, of course, the problem is that, you may wind up with some kind of like sectarian conflict, right? Like, if one version of Christianity tries to achieve primacy, there's no real, sort of solution for that. But hopefully you could get some sort of, okay, when the Treaty of Westphalia was signed, right, in 1648, which was the birth of the modern conception of the nation state, right? It birthed the idea of who's king, whose religion, right? And it came out as a result of the religious wars, I think it was the 30 Years' War, which was brutal, right? Catholics versus the Protestants. They basically came out and they said, okay, these are the sort of forms of Christianity that we will accept, right? Which was basically Catholicism, Protestantism, and I think it was Lutheranism. They kicked the Anabaptists out because the Anabaptists were a bit weird, okay? And you could just basically sort of make like a baseline sort of thing. Say like, this is sort of the basic form of Christianity that we'll accept. Now, of course, the atheists are going to absolutely lose their shit over this, right? Because, and look, I am vociferously against converting people by force. I just don't think it's a good idea, right? Like just for a whole bunch of reasons, you're never going to do it. And there could be a period of quite profound sort of upheaval while this goes along, but we're already in a period of quite profound upheaval. I just don't think that liberal atheism has the balls to stand up to things like Islam. It just doesn't, right? You are not going to talk the Muslims out of their position. I'm sorry, right? You're just not, right? You can pass all the laws you want. You can make all the finely tuned, rational arguments you want. They don't fucking care, right? Because it's religion. And you could go all Richard Dawkins and be like, hey, what we really need to do is find out like why these Muslims believe this, what psychological. It is a unifying language, right? It is a way to band together. It is a collective defense and a collective offense mechanism. And I hope that, quite frankly, more people look at the Muslims and, be like, well, why can't we have some of that? Why can't we have a unifying principle, right? Why can't we have a sort of line at which we can be like, no further? Because for the atheist, there really isn't, the atheist says, okay, right, like we're going to draw the line here. Then someone goes up to the line and they're like, oh, what about this edge case? What about that edge case? Have you read this like scientific paper, right? Like, did you ever read John Rawls? Fuck John Rawls, right? Like you need a place where you can just be like, no, we're not doing this, right? God says no. And there is in Christianity a fundamental sort of series of basic beliefs which would get rid of a lot of this stuff. It wouldn't be perfect, by the way. Like, I do not believe that there is such a thing as a perfect society. I really, really loathe people who like, oh, we're going to have a perfect No, you're not. No, you're not. You can have a better society or a worse society, and then for whom, right? You can't have a society that is better for everyone. No. You have to draw a line. You have to say, within this circle, for this group of people, it will be better. And people will be like, well, for outside of this circle, it will be worse. Well, fuck them. Because if you do not draw a line at some point, this is what the nation state was all about. The people within our borders who speak this language, right? And people feel this very, very strongly in the way, particularly in the UK, the way the governing class is acting. Because they don't seem to give a crap about the English. In fact, quite the opposite. They seem to be enamored of everything foreign. They're just like, the poor blacks, the poor Muslims. Dude, what about the English? Can we get some of that energy for the poor English? Oh, no. No, you've got to make a stand. And religion is a good thing in this, because you can say, we care about the Christians, right? The way the Muslims do, right? The Muslims are like, is he Muslim? Then I care about him. If he isn't, the Jews as well, right? It's one of the things I actually really admire about them, right? They're so strongly ethnocentric. They always stick up for each other. Wait, did we just lose
just your video feed?
Is it back? No,
yeah.
I think camera just we need that sort of ethno-religious nationalism. It doesn't have to be like the most hardcore thing in the world, right? You don't have to go like stalking around London and being like, are you hiding brown people under the floorboards, right? You don't have to go that far, right? But you do have to basically say who your government is for, and you need a group. That's what representation is supposed to be about, fundamentally.
Mm-hmm. So what ties ethnos together, or nation state, is language and currency. I think that's what the liberals tried to do, and then language kind of started to erode. But I think that the economic block is how they decide what is what, or where the lines are, because their whole system doesn't work if you don't declare at least a currency as distinct from another currency, because there's a lot of currency to be made from there, and also because I think that functions within their system of distinction. Language, not so much, but I think language is very important. I think that in the lead up to modernity, what happened in Europe was, just in France, and the very meager amount of history that I indulged in on France, is that there was all these different regions with all these different sub-ethnicities and sub-languages, and then the French government, the king, decided that French is the language. Yeah. And then they made like two kind of Frenches. One was the proper French for the aristocracy, and then there's a lower French where they actually pronounce all the consonants. And then eventually the aristocratic form of French kind of took hold. But it flattened France in that process. It flattened and it stifled a lot of people were out, but it centralized authority, and it made that system work for a while, or that state work for a while. And I think that it's really difficult to convince a liberal, and myself included, to release or to give up some of that progress, give up some of that openness, and to snap back to some of the unity and some of the hierarchy. It's very difficult to understand. We automatically itch against it. We don't want to sacrifice our own freedoms for the sake of stability. We don't. But at the same time, we're the country that implemented a 3.5 ounce rule on what you can bring on an airplane. And we have this amazingly tyrannical system, and it keeps on increasing. No matter what's going to happen, we're all going to have real ID, and we're all going to basically get more and more eaten up by the machine.
Right. What basically happens is that when it's something the government doesn't want to do, right, then they invoke, we don't want to impinge on people's personal freedoms. When it's something they do want to do, well, screw your freedoms, right? Look at COVID, right? Classic example. Up until that point, right, if it was any other thing, let us imagine that you're going to the UK government saying, we need to, do remigration, for example, right? We need to remove all of these people. They'd be like, oh, no, it'd be against English values, right?
Yeah.
COVID, they had no problem, right? So it is highly selective. When the government wants to do something, they just do it. And you are expected to suck it up and go along. And when they don't want to do it, they just roll out, the same, it's too hard. What about my human rights? And it's just highly selective. And again, harp on the point too much, but what about the human rights of the English people? How many people have died because of mass migration? No one wants to talk about it, right? I am absolutely certain there's no government department keeping track of that, because it's just seen as an unalloyed good. And my personal opinion on why a big reason financially why this has been happening is because of central banking and fiat currency. Essentially, you are constantly inflating the money supply, which means that the price of everything keeps going up. And so in order to contain this inflationary urge, you start finding cheap labor elsewhere. I'm sure someone other than me has made this point. Right?
No, it's kind of a quantitative easing via population replacement.
Correct, exactly. Now, what the US is about to find, and what the UK will also find if they actually do remigration, is that the price of everything is going to skyrocket because there is so much inflation that has been built up in the system from all of the insane amounts of money printing. And they're just, once this inflation is unleashed, it's going to be absolutely brutal. You may even get hyperinflation, but you're caught between the horns of a dilemma. You cannot just keep importing infinity Bomalians forever and ever. Sooner or later, as they find out, the wages keep going up. They always say that wages are a driver of inflation. Right? Well, what they basically mean is you print more money. The government prints the money, the government buys a bunch of stuff. There's less stuff to go around, thus the price rises. And then sooner or later, people are like, hey, my wage packet isn't buying me as much stuff as it should. The unions get involved and they're like, we need to raise wages. And when wages go up, that sort of pushes everything up. But really, the inflation was started when the government started printing money and using it to buy stuff. And I think that one of the things that is really underappreciated is the amount of money printing that has been done in order to support the war in Ukraine. Not just that, but also, net zero and all of these other like crazy things. I'm actually starting to think, that the whole net zero thing is just simply because the West wants to go to war with Russia. And so the countries like the UK have war gamed it. And they're like, well, if we get all of our energy from North Sea oil, right, the Russians can just come along and blow up all of our oil rigs. And so we can't do that. So maybe instead we'll, do a sort of like energy autarky. But they don't want to sell that to people because everyone will be like, why are we going to war with Russia? I still, for the life of me, cannot understand what the actual strategic value of Ukraine is. And perhaps this is what Schmidt was talking about, right? That because in the liberal society, you don't really need any excuse for war apart from the idea that your opponent is not liberal, right? And this is why every single foreign ruler that you dislike becomes Hitler, because Hitler is the arch anti-liberal. Therefore, your only real reason to go to war is because this person is anti-liberal. Therefore, Saddam was Hitler, and Gaddafi was Hitler, and Putin is Hitler, and we just have it's this weird kind of thing where we have defeated Hitler, and yet suddenly spawned a million
rent-free. Yeah,
it's like I actually want to start doing a series on sort of German history from World War I to the rise of the Nazis, because in the same way that those car mirrors where they're like things are closer than they may appear or whatever, it's like the further we get away from World War II, the more it just expands and magnifies in our imagination. It is great. Can you imagine what Carl Schmitt would think of our current political moment, right? When he died I don't know when he died, I think like the 90s or something like that, right? He probably like, I'm just this political theorist. He's hanging out talking with Leo Strauss and no. And now everybody is talking about him, right? And the principal refutation to his ideas is, he was a Nazi. That's not a refutation. And it dismays me that calling people a Nazi is like the one ring of power. It's like calling people a racist. It's the ring of power. And the woke centrists, they just cannot resist but to pick it up, right? So you've got the the woke right. It's just calling people Nazis, right? It's all it means, really.
Yeah.
Okay, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Nazi racists, you know, and plus you don't like Israel, right? Okay, you know, the
Or you're a
worst thing.
tyrant. You want to actually do something to save your country.
Well, yes,
qualifies.
you know, right? Like they are so stuck on procedure. It's like, you know, would you save your child from a burning house? Well, you know, not unless, you know, we had agreement from, you know, 100 different people, you know, the house burning committee and the saving committee. It's like they fetishize the process over the outcome. I see this all the time. It is the process, right? That is the most important thing, not the outcome. It's like, well, would you save the lives of 100 people? Well, did we follow the process doing it? You know, if we followed the process, then fine. Screw the fucking process. Like, there are more important things than the process, and the whole of society becomes enamored with this idea. And the groups that don't care about this just begin to seize power because they don't care about the process, right? The Muslims don't care about the process, right? And like, oh, you know, are you following the law? Muslims don't care. Right? They have another law that they are following, their own higher law, as it were. And this is why we're getting completely beaten, in my opinion.
Yeah, but the centrists are very worried about the right exerting any kind of power.
Yes.
Even though the left is still entrenched in every major institution, and credentialism is still ruling the day. I mean, you can't really... No matter how much we want to release tanks on Harvard Yard or whatever, you know, Harvard's still Harvard. We can't get around the idea that we still need a Harvard. We still need to be the trendsetters. We still have a Hollywood. You know, and maybe it's morphing into Netflix or whatever. But the woke centrists, even though the threat of the left is, one, much more entrenched and much more real and documented and present than the threat on the right, they still aim their ire at the right. And the right eventually, I think, iteratively is caring less and less about what the centrists think.
I think the woke centrists are much closer to the left because the left are atheists and so are they. And I think fundamentally, religion scares them, like actual religion. Like, you know, it's okay to be, you know, some sort of Judeo-Christian sort of like Baptist, like, oh yes, you know, I love the nation of Israel, and you know, I would never want to seize political power, right? But the actual, like the first target of the woke right thing was Christian nationalists. It just basically means actual Christians that want to exercise political power. Now, of course, you know, there's this dialectical thing going on again, right? There's either you have complete atheism in society, or you have this sort of complete God King, you know, ruling over, like, I mean, how the fuck is that going to happen in America, right? I just, you know, I tied myself in knots arguing with some of these people who'd like read too much, you know, Lindsay, absorbed too much Lindsay. And they really believe that after Trump got in, right, like suddenly there would be like a Christian God King, right, like ruling. And I was just, explain to me how this is meant to happen. Are you telling me that the American army, right, the military and the police are going to follow a Christian God King? It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah, but why is that threat so tangible to them?
Because they don't like religion, I think. I think that at heart they understand the left more because the left are atheists, and there is a larger bridge between woke centrist atheism and Christianity than there is between woke centrist atheism and left atheism. I think this is going to increasingly become the divide that defines America, whether you are Christian and whether you are not. And this is, for instance, one of the reasons why Lindsay's got himself in so much trouble, right? Because he's an atheist, or I don't know, maybe he converted to Reform Judaism. I really don't know. Okay, but he's going around telling people you're not a real Christian. Personally, that really offended me, actually. I was really like, excuse me, right? Like, and a lot of people felt this way. And Lindsay believed that he was, you know, cancelled. Oh, crap. He still's got a bank account and a YouTube channel, all this kind of other stuff. He just got disinvited because it turns out that Christians don't like an atheist going around saying, oh, you're a real Christian, you're not a real. Who the fuck does he think he is?
Well, what is a real Christian? I mean, maybe he understands that. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. The dividing line, as far as I can tell, is you're a real Christian if you really love the nation of Israel. Seems to be, right? Because the other group of Christians that he seemed to be targeting most vociferously are those who correctly understand that Judaism and Christianity are different religions, and the two-headed mutant hydra that has emerged, from dispensationalism and Christian Zionism and this, sort of 100, getting on 150, nearly 200 years, sort of attempt to artificially meld these two things together, is not. It's not real Christianity. I mean, again, you saying, well, which is, real Christianity? But there's just a bunch of stuff in Judeo-Christianity that has nothing to do with Christianity. The rapture is not a thing. Okay, the rapture. Okay, right. The rapture is not a Christian thing, right? If anything, it's from Judaism, right? The idea that the world will be perfected is a fundamentally Jewish idea, actually, right? That you will have heaven on earth. There are so many of these ideas from Judaism that have leaked their way over into Christianity. The most telling idea, of course, is the idea that you can affect the outcome of God, right? That if we do this certain thing, right, we will usher in the apocalypse or do this. No. No man knows the day or the hour. In Christianity, right, nothing you do is going to make Jesus come a day earlier, right? It's just not up for discussion. There's nothing you can do, right? It's not about that. The idea that you can influence the time of the return of the Messiah is a fundamentally Orthodox Jewish idea, in fact. And so many of these ideas have leaked over. And
what could you tell me from your point of view, what is the proper way to conceive of the return of the Messiah or the second coming of Christ?
Honestly, I don't really think about it that much. I think that it detracts from the idea of just trying to do the best that you can on the earth now. I think it's a big distraction. Will Jesus come again? Well, yeah, I guess. When? I've got no idea. I just don't think it's very relevant. And I think this massive focus on the return of the Messiah, as I was saying, is much more a Jewish idea than a Christian idea. If you look through Judaism, this is a big idea, right? So after the Spanish expulsion, the Jews expelled from Spain wandered through Turkey and Palestine and all of these kinds of places, right? And they sort of quite predictably, instead of asking themselves, well, what was it that we did to piss off the Gentile Spaniards, right? They were like, well, what did we do to offend God? Right? This is pretty much a constant thing, okay? And in this sort of fervid environment emerged a figure called Sabbatai Zevi. Really great book on him, by the way, by Gerald Scholem. It will break your brain, but it's amazing. And he rose up basically as a Messiah. Half of Judaism followed him. The other half, the wiser half, were like, no, we're not doing any of that, right? Again, let us not pretend for a moment that the Jewish people are a monolith, because they are not, right? You cannot say that the Jews as a whole believe X or Y. It irritates the fuck out of me when people do this, right? I understand it's very simplistic, but it's just not accurate, right? So Sabbatai Zevi sort of rose up and got really into Kabbalism and sort of what would later become Frankism. This idea that because the Messiah was about to come, all of the rules needed to be tore up, and we're not following the ancient laws anymore. And I believe he set an actual date. I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while since I read, but essentially everyone was in hope that the Messiah would come. They abandoned all of these rules. It became this big sort of heretical thing, and then eventually he got captured by the Ottomans and converted to Islam in the Ottoman Empire, right? And then when that happened, the whole thing basically collapsed, and the Jews that still believed in him were like, it's over. It's finally over. So this idea that you can affect the coming of the Messiah. So, for example, this is something that Netanyahu is very, very much into. Netanyahu is a big believer in another Jewish person who was claimed sort of by some to be the Messiah, which is Rabbi Mendel Schneerson, who is the head of Chabad Lubavitch. And there's a great video clip actually of him talking with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu's like, what can I do? And Schneerson's like, the Messiah still hasn't come. It's 3:00. Where's he at? You have to do something. And Netanyahu.
What happens when the Messiah comes from the Judeo?
Sorry.
What happens when the Messiah comes for Jews in their...
Okay, so when the Messiah comes, he will set up the Sanhedrin, which is the sort of world Jewish court. He will make all of the Gentiles obey the 7 Noahide laws, which are...
So there's 316 laws for all Jews, but there's just 7 for everybody else.
Correct. And it needs to be stressed that these laws are all designed to be interpreted by a Jewish court, right? So, for example, one of the rules is, do not murder. But, is going to war murder? Well, the Jewish court will decide this, right? The Sanhedrin sets up courts around the entire Gentile world. And then the idea is that all of the Gentiles will just convert to Noahideism and everyone will live happily ever after, sort of. It gets very, very vague towards the end. Now, one of the big problems is that one of the Noahide laws is against idolatry. And depending on who you read, Maimonides, I can never pronounce this guy's name, Maimonides, right, had a very strong interpretation of what idolatry was. And under his strict interpretation of idolatry, basically all forms of Christianity would be outlawed because genuflecting to the cross is technically idolatry. The Orthodox practice of, kissing the icons of the saints, very, very right. So this could potentially lead to massive war. And it's funny because the Christian Zionists believe a sort of related but slightly inverted reason. They believe that once Jesus comes back, all the Jews will convert to Christianity. That is never happening, by the way, right? So a lot of this seems to be, in my opinion, sort of apocalyptica generally, is like kind of just trying to set up like an end state. But yeah, basically the Jews will rule over the entire world from, I guess, Israel, where they will administer the entire world via a world court, essentially. And that sounds
so it's very juridical. It's ruled by judges.
Yes. In fact, I think the 7th Noahide law is that you will set up courts of law. Well, what law? Jewish law, obviously. But they are a very legalistic and disputative people. Judaism, Islam is like that as well, actually, by the way. There's very, very, rules for basically everything, Christianity is much more loose in its sort of, in Islam and in like sort of, hardcore Orthodox Judaism, right? There's a rule for like how you brush your teeth and how you go to the toilet and how you like enter a door and how you close the door and open a door and all this kind of like other stuff. There's none of that in Christianity. And these...
It's interesting because Christianity is less idolatrous in a certain respect than these highly legalistic religions that have certain that rule over every little domain, which just makes you worship the gesture rather than just interacting with life in a direct manner, intuitively. And maybe you do it wrong. Maybe God teaches you. Maybe you're in this constant state of development, but that development is papered over by, no, there's the right way to do things. If you do things the right way, then you will be in accordance with the God, rather than if you be yourself, which is, the Christian and being yourself is kind of what we're dealing with now. The Christianity that we live under now is so individualistic atheistic, that there is no God, there's barely any belief in God, everything's Unitarian, like you just do you, and you ramshackle your religion and your belief structure together, and whatever works, just, vibe code your spirituality kind of thing.
Basically. Yeah, and because no one can possibly adhere to all these laws, by the way, this is one of the reasons why you need animal sacrifice. This is the rather sinister meaning of the idea of a covenant, that when you under sort of Orthodox Judaism, you break the law, and the penalty for breaking the law is death. Now, because no one can possibly adhere to all of these many laws, you sacrifice an animal in the place of your sin. And this is one of the points about Christianity, was that the self-sacrifice of Jesus was meant to undermine this entire system. And in Orthodox Judaism, they still do this. Kaparot, they'll get like a chicken and they'll put their sins on the chicken. And then
Islam doesn't have a sacrifice way to release that.
I don't think so. I might be wrong. I am hardly an Islamic scholar in this regard, although living in the UK, I've had to learn more about Islam than, quite frankly, I wanted to. You have to live around these people, But it's weirdly, it is weirdly fat. Jewish history is actually bloody awesome, right? It's like Game of Thrones on crack for like 100 seasons. It's the most crazy stuff, But yeah, they're not compatible religions, and I think that trying to adhere to a two-headed hydra made out of both is frankly making people insane,
So where did you said you started making content about 6 years ago. What instigated your content creation? COVID. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
COVID. Yeah.
You started a podcast like everybody else.
Basically, yes. Except I started on Odyssey because YouTube was just like banning everyone left, right, and center, and I was just basically losing my shit, and so I just started doing a news show just summarizing all the crazy COVID news, and then after a while I went to Rumble, and then eventually I started on YouTube. Although YouTube doesn't really like me that much, I'm not really sure what's going to happen with YouTube. I know in America they're about to like liberalize, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen in the UK or not. It's a terrible thing, the whole shadow banning thing, because you never know whether the reason you're not getting reach is because your product isn't great, or because you're being suppressed by the algorithm. It really makes you sort of feel helpless, and it disincentivizes you from improving stuff, because you're like, it doesn't matter. So, I've got a small sort of committed following. And then I started doing Empire of Lies with Yiz the Eunuch. I don't know if you know Yiz. We started doing sort of political theory stuff, anarcho-tyranny, Cloud Piven, all this kind of like other stuff. That was kind of fun. And now I'm doing this live stream with Rhetorically Defective, which I believe you're quite enjoyer of. That seems to be going
every Friday,
quite well.
Like 3 p.m. Eastern, I think it is. Or
it's 3 p.m. Eastern on Rhetorically Defective's channel. That's actually really starting to do numbers, which is great. I'm sort of like a mercenary co-host. I just go around like co-hosting stuff on other people's channels, because I guess I kind of feel like if I'm on a channel of someone who's in America, there's less chance of the channel being nuked. The massive banning that happened in the UK during COVID, like not just Twitter, and I spent a lot of time researching all of this, misinformation, malinformation, the Disinformation Governance Board, all of this kind of like stuff, and the EU, it just became crystal clear that they don't want my kind of freedom of expression, right? It's like, freedom of expression, just watch your fucking mouth, right? Like don't say anything too spicy, or we'll chuck you down the hole, and no one will even hear your screams, And they haven't reversed on that. And again, I think it's liberalism again, like we were talking about earlier. They don't just want to control the action; they want to control the thought, because their reasoning is that, well, you have to think about a thing before you do the thing. So therefore, if we can stop people thinking about the thing and talking about the thing, then they can't do the thing. But that doesn't actually really work in practice, because a lot of human activity is basically impulsive, really, if you think about it, particularly mass outbreaks, right? The mass of the crowd. It's more of a spontaneous thing. But I guess because they're all rationalists, they just sort of believe, we just stop people talking about mass immigration and the horrible effects, and then no one will notice the fact that nobody speaks English in their neighborhood anymore, like somehow.
Well, to be honest, I am a liberal by trade and by constitution, and I don't want to live in a non-liberal society, but I'm of the mind that liberalism is a bubble that needs something that's not liberalism containing it and maintaining it. That's just like, that's where I am. And so I go hard after the woke centrists, as we call them in this show, because I don't think that they're particularly effective, and I think that they're undermining the actual maintenance and sustenance of liberalism, the liberalism that they want. I want freedom of expression. I want to be able to call a spade too. It is interesting. There's that kind of that stone toss comment about, well, what if we had the gun? If we had the gun, if we use the gun, won't our enemies use the gun against us when they get the gun, and their enemies already using the gun? And Jimmy Kimmel, I guess, was kind of pressured off via the FCC. I don't know the whole story, but I think that the FCC pressured ABC to kick Jimmy Kimmel off the air. Jimmy Kimmel's back on the air after a bunch of affiliates, believe, were threatened by terrorist activity, and plus the progressives hated that their voice was stifled, and that was the worst thing ever in the wake of a political assassination from their side. Maybe not them, maybe they had nothing to do with it, though their rhetoric seems to facilitate that. So I don't want the government policing speech. I think that there is a marketplace and a natural audience that, if all things being equal, the audience democratically should decide which voices get more reach, because they want to listen to those things. So I do want freedom. I do want freedom. At the same time, you have these Discord communities, you have these Antifa cells. There was that Apple series that was going to come out that was painting right-wing terrorist cells on the internet as the epitome of political violence, and they've had to delay that because it turns out that actually they had the wrong target. And of course they had the wrong target. They explicitly wanted to have the wrong target. Since January 6th and before then, since Charlottesville, before then, they've been targeting the right and using the entire power of the state to maliciously punish people that have memes about Hillary Clinton, right? So I don't know how to balance, and I don't know who to trust in the Trump government. I don't know to what degree J.D. Vance is actually more of a technocrat than a Christian. I don't know where that whole thing is headed, and I can see it heading too far. I can see, to some degree, James Lindsay's wariness of the of tyranny from the right. I think it's a very far stretch, because they have to have cultural cachet that they don't have yet. They have to have some dark elves, as well as hobbits, to kind of do a callback to Yarvin, who Dave the Distributist was talking about last night, in Dave the Distributist's response to Charlie Kirk's memorial service, which I didn't watch, which was apparently a very bombastic thing that even right-wing commentators from England were rather repulsed by. I mean, it's very repulsive Trumpian WWF or E.
But I mean, I've been developing this theory actually for a while, that people are not actually moved by words. People are moved by events. And it is a mistake actually to think that people are moved by words, right? And because an event happened, suddenly that caused this massive reframing. I've kind of thought, actually, for years at this point, that the US is heading towards a civil war, right? Like, again, not to, be all Tim Pool, but just simply because you have two large groups of people that are ostensibly speaking the same language, but they're not actually, right? If you take the difference between the left and the right and take basically any abstract concept, love, freedom, liberty, man, woman, no. They use the same words, but the meanings are completely divorced. And generally speaking, it is actually through the use of force that the meanings of words are ultimately decided, really, right? Now, obviously, I'm actually with you on this. I'm a bit of a liberal at heart, really, too. I would be quite happy to go back to the 90s or whatever, back to Fresh Prince and all this kind of other stuff. But I think things have moved too far. And I think that we're already seeing it, but we are about to see a replay of the early 1970s in the US, where leftist violence just spikes massively because they have just dehumanized half the country. And I think the right has been resisting this for a long time, right? They don't want to enter into the dehumanization spiral, right? I mean, okay, sure, there's always going to be some edgy 4chan boys who are like, but I mean, the broad sort of, of the right. Also, it's quite unchristian, generally speaking, to dehumanize groups of people. I think the right are sort of quite resistant to it. But if shit gets bad enough, they will. This is the thing. It only takes one side really to make war. It takes two sides to make peace. If you have one side that is constantly jigging the escalation ladder up and up and up and up and up, you can only respond. And the political assassination is a massive escalation. It is in terms of, I mean, because of America's history and the history in the UK, when people say civil war, they, in the back of their minds, they're always thinking of, like the American Civil War, two lines of soldiers from the north and the south. They line up across a field and they shoot at each other. No. Like what you're talking about is more like a, low grade civil conflict, like something like the Years of Lead in was it Argentina had the Years of Lead? Argentina or Spain or these other. And again, much like the US, all of this came down to the communists versus the fascists, right? Or the communists versus the loyalists, the communists, the godless atheist communists versus the religious. These sides are always basically the same. Now, one of the things that I've been considering is, okay, say the right does go on a massive cancellation thing, right? They get in the schools and they cancel all these people and they fire them from their jobs. Where are they going to go? This is the unanswered question of cancellation, right? You haven't removed these people, right? You've just deprived them of their livelihood. You're likely just to make them more extreme. It certainly happened on the right. So when you disenfranchise all these lefties from society, well, what's going to happen to them? A bunch of them, I think, are probably going to start spinning up groups like the Weather Underground, except probably even more violent. At least the Weather Underground never killed anybody. Although it was a bit of a close run thing, right? Like the main reason they didn't start killing people was the first time they planned a bombing at I think it was a USO show or a military dance or something. The dude making the bomb, I think it was in San Francisco, went off and blew up his entire house. And then the entirety of the Weather Underground were war, maybe we should, reconsider. But there's certainly enough genocidal rhetoric, particularly against whites, floating around there for them to make something of it, and if that kicks off, then the government's going to be forced to respond. Of course, the government does have overwhelming force. This is why everyone wants to own the government. I think the Jimmy Kimmel thing is just an attempt to regain control of the narrative. Quite frankly, I think the left wing cannot abide the idea that for once the right have suffered a righteous injury. It makes them look bad, right? We are the ones who oppress. We are the ones who suffer, right? You are the ones that sit on your high horse with your whiteness and your white supremacy and all the money and the power, marginalizing black and brown bodies and all this other fucking like bullshit that they like bang on about, right? They can't parse any situation in which they are not the righteous victim, right? And because Charlie Kirk is very clearly a righteous victim, right? Because he literally didn't do nothing, right? He's not some like, crackhead with like 14 previous criminal convictions.
But his rhetoric was harmful.
Yeah. He wasn't on his way home from astronaut school and, just through no fault of his own, happened to like kill a whole bunch of people in a home invasion, right? Like Charlie was actually the real deal. He was, he just talked to people and okay, he said spicy stuff. But I think that, again, it's a religious divide. They really hate it because he was Christian, like quite frankly. I think there is an insurmountable divide because the way the world works to the religious and the way the world works to the atheist, you can't bridge that gap. You just can't, right? Like you can't, and this is why religion is so powerful. You can't reason yourself around a belief in God. Again, to use the Muslims as an example, why don't you sit one of them down and try explaining with all your fine rationalist argument? Imagine like Sam Harris versus like Al-Qaeda. Mr. Harris, I do not agree with you. You are still an infidel. It's not going to work. So I think the only option that they have left is more escalation. This escalation will drive more acceptance of more escalatory policies from the Trump administration. And then there'll be sort of like a brief period where the Trump administration can basically do no wrong, right? So they'll start rounding people up. And then at some point, something will go wrong. And the Trump administration will kill someone right wing or, someone will die in jail. Something with really bad optics will emerge. And then the sort of center will start being like, actually, this is a bit much. Like, maybe, like, no. It's a right mess. What do you do with the communists? Like, what do you do with them? Right? Like, you can't force them all to go to church. What about all the trans? Like, what about all the psycho trans? You can't reattach their bits. Right, like these are messed up people. Like no shade to like the normal trans people. I'm not talking about them. Right, like I really don't. I'm really not like obsessively hateful towards that group of people. I know some like cool trans people, right? But the psycho ones, right? What, you're going to de-radicalize them? How are you going to de-radicalize? What, you're going to sit them down and make them read the Bible for like 3 months? I don't think that's going to work. Yeah. So you're going to wind up at this impasse where you're going to have this group of extremists that something has to be done with. But I think what has happened with Kirk is that a lot of the people that were sort of enabling this extremism, I don't know if you saw Shoe on Head's video, right? But she is of the left, generally speaking. And I think many of them have been disgusted by what has been growing under the floorboards essentially for the last 20, 30 years. And they're suddenly like, oh shit, you guys weren't joking. This wasn't just a meme. You really are going to like try and enact a bloody revolution. I don't know. How many people are there? That's the question, right? Like what percentage of the US population are you talking about who are like this? Because if it's above a certain percentage, you're going to have a real fucking problem.
Yeah. Just before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, there was a event where a Ukrainian migrant who happened to be rather attractive was killed for absolutely no reason on a bus by a black man who was for absolutely no reason released on the street, I think 14 times by that point. I think I heard somewhere that he's already back out or he's in some mental institution. They're not going to put him in jail.
He's a schizophrenic from the sounds of it. Yeah.
And that was stirring up rhetoric on the right about, no more, and the centrists and the what's called Lindsayite camp, which I think is a apt term and an unfortunate term, but James has decided on a rhetorical strategy that creates people that just believe and just think within his bubble. And
it's true. It's true. Yeah.
And it becomes very rigid. So you have these people that agree with him because there's either agree with him or you're wrong in whatever direction. And so they kind of, and the problem with any cult structure like that is that there can be nobody smarter than the head. And so you have people of dramatically less intelligence than James. And James is very brilliant in his way, but he doesn't have the breadth of experience or, in my humble opinion, the pastoral, wise connection to actually dealing with people on a day-to-day basis to actually tend to the needs of his followers. So they're just kind of going around regurgitating his talking points. And there are smart people within his sphere of influence, and one of them was kind of calling out the right for, like stirring up violence, stirring up political violence. And I said to him, like, the right, the people who are being stirred up are not going to riot like the left did. They're not going to do that. You can see in the wake of Charlie Kirk being assassinated, there have been no riots, no right-wing extrajudicial acts of either terror or vengeance. There have been rallies, and there have been church services, and there has been an uptick in Charlie's pattern of political engagement, because the right is essentially orderly, and the right essentially doesn't want to destroy their own property to prove a point. And the left wasn't destroying their own property; it was destroying property that they don't care about.
This might be politically incorrect to say, but also fundamentally different racial demographics. Sorry, right? Like most of the right,
Well, yeah, yes, but at the same time, a lot of the Antifa, the white Antifa, were going down to black districts, and there's a mentally ill contingent of leftists on the white spectrum that were facilitating a lot of the absolute insanity and just dumbassery of the BLM 2020 period. I mean, even the liberal progressive churches who started worshiping and praying to black people and prostrating themselves and flagellating themselves, a lot of white, and that's another problem with Britain and the American upper crust, that just they loathe themselves. They loathe their identity, and are willing to sacrifice their identity and their children's future prosperity on the altar of, the civil rights crusade that they were born into. And it's and they trust the institutions, and they have a whole generational understanding of how America works and how justice bends towards history, or history bends towards justice, that is incompatible with what the right is speaking to. But I don't think that you're going to see, I don't think we're going to see a fascist uprising. I don't think you're going to see a Nazi-ish revolution that utilizes violence. I don't think you're going to see a Bolshevik revolution that bends the arc of justice towards order. But at the same time, the process of restitution and justice is going to be more procedural and will be, like you were saying, like it's going to have some hitches, and there's going to be some bad optics, and that'll probably derail it because they constitutionally can't be strong. The right constitutionally can be spicy, but I don't think it can be strong because it wants good-natured order. It wants people to produce babies and have families and be able to afford a home. And so I don't see political violence from the right.
You need a collapse in the power of the central government, which does not seem to be happening right now. The left obviously tried to take over the government. But I mean, perhaps it is a commentary on the soundness of the American system that Trump managed to get in and managed to wrest control of the government back under his control. I think this speaks very positively of the American system. And for the record, I'm a big fan of the American system, right? I'm what you would call a reluctant post-liberal, right? Like I don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that like
I guess that's me too.
I can't wait to see liberalism go down. I just think that what we are experiencing is circumstances have arisen that are beyond the bounds of liberalism. And again, to go back to Schmitt, right? You cannot design a system that foresees everything, and thus when you get an exceptional circumstance pop up, someone has to make a decision. But the thing is, like, what isn't really sort of commented about Schmitt is that if that is working correctly and you have a proper sovereign, right, then the sovereign decides upon the exception, he fixes the problem, and then it goes back to normal, right? This idea that the sovereign decides upon the exception, right, and then Nazism, that's not what Schmitt's talking about at all. What Schmitt is talking about is an exceptional circumstances arises, the sovereign exercises force, fixes the problem, and then we all go back to normal. So no, unless, I mean, look, in the Weimar Republic, you had the Antifa, anti-fascist action, who were like one big political muscle group, and you had the National Socialists, who were another huge political muscle group, and you had very, very weak, essentially paralyzed central government. And you don't have that situation in the US, right? The government there is still strong. The army still obeys it. Again, Weimar Germany had been through like a horrible war. They had like hyperinflation. They had all kinds of like really, really, really bad problems going on. They sort of essentially didn't really have much of a government. So no, I don't. I think again, it's just people calling people that they don't like Nazis because they don't really have anything else. It's like this really weird. Like I was saying, it's like Nazism, or the fear of Nazism has just infected everything. It's just grown to become this insane mental bugbear, and everyone loves to pick up the one ring and wield it about against people they don't like, basically, right? And the woke centrists, because they're atheists fundamentally at heart, they can't resist it, because at the end of the day, they're still anti-racists, really, right? They're just basically anti-racists and blank slatists. Now, that's all very well and nice, and I really wish that the world worked that way. I do. I honestly wish that the world did work that way, right? And I've had a bunch of conversations with the woke centrists who have informed me that the problem with Schmitt is that there is no description of the world that is not proscriptive, right? So every single time you describe the world, right, you are essentially introducing your own bias into it, and therefore implying that we have to do something about it. I disagree. with that, right? If that is the case, then there is no accurate understanding of history. There is no accurate understanding of politics. You're basically
very social constructivist. If you describe the thing, you make it real. You reify the thing.
You're back to social constructivism, right? Look, read Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy, right? And tell me that is not a guy trying to do his darndest to simply describe history without a prescriptive measure attached to it. Everyone talks about the prince, Machiavelli, the prince. Read Discourses on Livy. It's a far better book, and it's in the vein of a lot of books that were written around this era on politics. And it was just basically like, here's a historical event. Because this historical event can teach us the following rule about politics, right? Here's another historical event. And it's not... the reason why people hate Machiavelli is because of what it reveals about human nature and political power. And unfortunately, right, woke centrists seething and molding, right?
The actual it's very offensive.
Yeah, well, the actual function and use of political power is a bit messy. It's not all, and this is why I really wish people like James would just do undergrad political science. Like, oh my God, it really rustles my jimmies, right? I guess it would be the equivalent of
Machiavelli. Machiavelli is the Darwin of liberalism. It's like, just as Darwin is to Christians, with the theory of evolution just upsets Christians on a very fundamental level. And I understand that, because it's a horrific idea that this thing is just this self-organizing system that has these processes that don't care about anything other than persisting through time. And it makes all these very insightful understandings. And then if you try to take that evolutionary framework and then put it on and make human beings obey it or live by it, then you're going to destroy humanity, because it doesn't really work in the domain of culture, and it doesn't really describe what a human being is. In my humble opinion, it describes how we function, but it doesn't describe the telos of us, and it doesn't describe the spiritual aspects, and it doesn't really touch upon the deep aspects of us, but it does describe the natural aspects of it. And Christians have a hard time with Darwin. And to this day, they'll deny it and go through all these different, like, wiggly, waddly, whirligig things to get around it and make it make sense, and good on them. But Machiavelli does the same thing to the liberals, because they're like, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. We don't do that. That's everything we don't want to do with our systems and our procedures. And they're like, well, yeah, but you're still doing it in all your systems and procedures. And it doesn't necessarily, Machiavelli, or what he describes, doesn't necessarily. And all the dissident right stuff, all the Machiavellians, to follow Burnham's absolutely essential work, which popped me out of the liberal consensus way of thinking. It's that you can look at these things, and if you make peace with these things, you actually can make the system function closer to what you want the system to function at. If you just admit friend and enemy, or these Machiavellian strategies are how power works. If you just say power is a constant and it's amoral, and if we can restrain it, you can't restrain something you refuse to see. It just grows bigger and bigger under your bed and in your closet. That's all it does. So, so just face your fear.
I see this all the time, right? Like, so my first year of political science was just, what is power? How is power gained? How is power used, right? Like, how do you define it, right? It's actually a very, very complicated thing. There's a video I did on User's channel called The Four Faces of Power, if anyone's interested. But this is actually a very, very complicated, like, question, right? There's like the power to do or not to do something, right? And they always have this very simplistic idea that power is just this brute force thing, right? Like, in the back of their minds, they're always basically thinking of Stalin's Russia or Mao's China, right? Like, power is when you get a club and you beat someone, like, do the thing. And it disturbs me that they think this, because they should fucking know better, right? Power is neutral in of itself, right? Is it power to do what? Right? It's like technology, right? Like, you could use your power to save a drowning child, or you could use your power to execute 1,000 dissidents, right? One is a virtuous use of power. The other is an unvirtuous use of power. Well, maybe, right? I mean, what are these, were these 1,000 dissidents like trying to like burn down the parliament, for example? Like, it gets very, very, very complicated. And this idea that you can, and I think this is the liberal frame, that somehow if you just disperse responsibility through enough structures, right? And no one person ever has to take responsibility or ever take a decision, right? Power will be diffused, but that's not how it fucking works, right? The more complicated the system, the more specialized the people that inhabit it. And then you wind up with these people, and their entire job basically is to just be part of and game these systems. And it is they who wind up with unaccountable power, because they make the decision. And when someone comes along and is like, who made this decision? They're like, oh, nobody made this decision. We all voted on it, right? Like, you can't hold anyone to account. I'll tell you one thing about monarchy, right? At least under a monarchy, you can blame the fucking king, right? Yeah. And I think this is one of the reasons why conspiracy theories and, J-spurging and stuff like that have massively proliferated, because power is now hidden. And because power is hidden, the only way you can really work out how it works is by studying its effects and sort of trying to work backwards. And it can be quite maddening, because hidden power never announces its actual goals, right? Like, this is the kind of government that we tend to have in the West now, right? No one ever comes out and says, exactly what it is they want to do, right? Like no one comes out and says, oh, we're going to flood you all with like migrants now, because they know there would be pushback. So instead, they rule in this concealed, very sneaky sort of way, right? And it's impossible to tell who actually makes the decision at any point in time. And it starts driving people insane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then we need to do an animal sacrifice to purge the system.
Exactly. Exactly. Or, you know, or, I don't know, a human sacrifice, I guess. I think that shit's coming back into vogue now, you know.
Wow.
I don't know. Like, you sacrifice 1,000 Nazis on the altar of liberalism or something like that. It's very, very strange.
NEWSFIST. Thanks a lot for joining me. That was a very fun conversation. We'll have to do it again.
Let's do it again
later. So where are you located? Where are people going to find when you get there? And why NEWSFIST? That sounds kind of...
It was just something I literally thought up at the spur of the moment when I started doing my stupid channel. Spur of the moment, and it's just stuck with me, right? So it's one of those like weird things you just literally think of at the moment. You're like, oh, that kind of sounds cool, and then 5 years later, I'm still stuck with it, and it has terrible search engine optimization, actually, right? So if you try and find me on YouTube, instead you get this channel called NEWSFIRST. It's like a Sri Lankan news channel. I don't really want to change it, right? Like, look. So anyway, look, you can find all of my links at newsfist.net. I've got like links to like everything. I'm on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble. That's like my news show, my twice weekly news show, which has basically been on hiatus for a little bit because I needed to clear my head.
Yeah.
You can also find a bunch of stuff on Use the Unix channel. Empire of Lies is the show that we did. That's like more sort of political theory. And of course, you can check me out on Rhetorically Defective's channel on Friday nights. Well, I guess Friday afternoon for you Ameribros. That's more sort of like shitposty, kind of like culture war sort of stream.
It's a throwback to Bloodsports days. It's a throwback.
Yeah, we're trying to bring the internet back to like 2017. You know, with the sort of the generally sort of crude demeanor and kind of like. Yeah, I like it. I miss pre-revolutionary YouTube. So we're trying to do that. Yeah, so newsfist.net. You can find everything there.
What is occupying your serious efforts? Like what are you seriously aiming at?
I'm not really sure. I guess political theory really is basically my passion. I think that not enough people understand how the political class work. And because there have been so many people excluded from the political class, myself, for example, and all the sort of right wingers, like there's no way they're letting you anywhere near political power. So, we're stuck on the outside looking in, right? There are so many really, really good thinkers who would, in another universe, be part of a think tank or, occupy positions in government, but, you can't because, you're racist or you're a Nazi, you're this and that and the other. And so I guess fundamentally it's just sort of watching the flow of politics go by, try and make predictions of what's going to happen next. And through those predictions, try and essentially divine the hidden nature of power and how it's actually operating. Because it's a question that really, because I like really meaty questions, and I guess that's the meatiest one of all. And you can chew on that literally I've got one of those minds. If I don't have a big question to chew on, I just,
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just hoping to just, I'm a bit of a roving co-host. I just like to go on other people's channel. I really just like other people. I just like to talk to people. I guess I'm a bit. I don't really like Bloodsports. I just don't think that
your interaction with the so-called Lindsayites has always been very above board and honestly seeking to understand and to reach them where they are. Yep. And your frustration comes from the inability for them to budge frame.
Well, also, I had this, sort of, it took me like a couple of days talking with classical liberal. I spent an entire weekend like talking. Really, very, very nice of him, by the way, to respond so fulsomely to me, and I do really, really appreciate that. To arrive basically at the point of understanding that we just can't agree. But I wanted to know like why we couldn't agree, right? Like, what was the root of the disagreement? And I guess it was the descriptive versus prescriptive kind of thing, and the idea that according to Scottish classical liberalism, there was a way of sort of perceiving external reality directly through the senses, and I don't know. I just I couldn't really wrap my head around it. But I found it fascinating that I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was just like, what is this thing that I cannot understand? I think fundamentally it came down to the difference between politics and philosophy, right? Because I'm all about politics and stuff like that. There are points at which philosophy breaks down, right? If the barbarians are kicking in your door, you have to take up the sword. You can't just stand there and debate them about Locke and Kant and this kind of other stuff. And I think this is actually fundamentally what scares a lot of the philosophy types. They don't really want to, and again, the people who hate Machiavelli, they don't want to believe that the world is fundamentally like that. That they're at a certain point. There will be a use of power and there must be a use of force, right? Fundamentally, that's what the world operates on. Laws do not enforce themselves, right? There's no such thing as a self-licking ice cream cone when it comes to law. The law is nothing without enforcement. And I think they want everyone to sort of just obey based upon these higher ideals. But these higher
Hands up, don't rule. Hands up, don't rule.
These ideals were founded in periods of relative stability, and these periods of relative stability were maintained by force. They didn't just grow ab initio out of nowhere, right? Force was used to maintain. Fences were used to, secure these areas off from roaming bands of Bomalians. And if you're not willing to do that, then all of your philosophical thought is going to come to naught, basically.
Yeah. They're more scared of hemlock than of the barbarians. And
yeah.
I mean, with good reason. If all you do is walk around the Stoa all day, and admire warriors from afar for their glistening pectoral muscles, but not really not wanting to get dirty yourself. I mean,
these people would be terrible in government. By the way, right? This is the conclusion that I have come to, by the way, that
really,
God help us if you have people like that in government. And I'm starting to wonder if that's not part of the reason why we're in the mess that we're in, that we have a bunch of people like this in government who are just, they are afraid of human nature. They are afraid to grasp the nettle. They are afraid basically to do anything, because at the end of the day, doing anything is fascism or some fucking weird, so they spend all their time just sitting around, debating this and that and the other, and nothing ever gets done, and everything just gets steadily worse and worse and worse. And why are things getting worse? We have the correct opinions. Well, the correct opinions don't mean anything if you're not willing to use a bit of force and occasionally lay about with the club to keep people in line. Unfortunately, that's the way humans work,
Bringing that fist right through the news.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Ben. I really appreciate it, man.
That was fun. That was really fun. I'll post this on the Jiffy. Let me end the recording.
Sweet.
Good night.
All right. Take care of yourself.
All right. There you go.